Well, it's time for a video on the new current thing, but this is an interesting one because we always hear this good guy with a firearm. They're never there when you need them. This is a right-wing myth. Well, every situation is individual, and all these events occur with individuals. There was in the last event at the school, which has some suspicious circumstances around it. I don't know how a poor kid afforded a top-of-the-line rifle, but we'll take it at face value. Let's take the mainstream media at face value. That's always a dangerous thing. But even the cops wouldn't go in. Maybe we should have had a bunch of mental counselors go in there instead, am I right? We're supposed to hand in our ability to defend ourselves and defund the police. And I seem to remember another time police were told to stand down. There was a whole bunch of black-clad rioters that were ignored. Anyway, what I want to focus on is this event in which the left likes to claim never happens. Here in Charleston, West Virginia, police said a woman who was lawfully carrying a pistol shot and ended a man who began shooting at a crowd of people Wednesday night in Charleston. Dennis Butler was ended after allegedly shooting at dozens of people that were attending a graduation party near an apartment complex. No injuries were reported. Investigators said Butler was warned about speeding in the area with children present before he left. He returned about a half hour later with an AR-15 and began firing into the crowd before he was taken out by a woman that was concealed carrying. Good job. But I bet she could have beat him up with some kung fu if modern day action sequences in movies are to be believed. All she had to do was flip this big guy over her shoulder and punch him a couple times, right? Girl power. Instead of running from the threat, she engaged with the threat, and she saved several lives. Boy, I'm sure you'll see this one on CNN and the Daily Beast and MSNBC tonight. Any day now. What was this? This is Wednesday? What is it? Saturday?
Butler. Now, Lieutenant Tony Hazel says no one was injured and that this woman did the right thing.
This lady was carrying a lawful firearm, okay? A law-abiding citizen who stopped the threat of probably 20 to 30 people getting killed. She engaged the threat and stopped it. She didn't run from the threat, she engaged it, preventing a mass casualty here in Charleston.
Now, this is a picture from 2018 of Butler from a previous arrest. Police say Butler had an extensive criminal history. They still are not exactly sure how he got that gun. Now, all witnesses and the woman are cooperating with police, and as of right now, no charges are being brought against that woman. For now, reporting at police headquarters, Ava Rash, Eyewitness News.
Oh, more background checks, right? That's what we need. So, you've seen the articles and the jousts, the rhetorical jousts and the arguments that go back and forth. And one of the things I'm perpetually disappointed with is the right wings. So, whatever, you know what I mean. The pro-freedom versus the pro-centrality party. The response is always so autistic. And I'm thinking, the left has lost the argument. They lost the argument a long time ago. They lost the argument for centrality when the Soviet Union collapsed. But they're damn good at rhetoric. Rhetoric being kind of the sloganeering, yes we can, which doesn't really mean anything, versus the dialectic, which is the coherent argument. But the thing is, rhetoric is much easier for most people to understand. It charges them up. It gets an emotional response. And even though we see the right gradually expanding gun rights and winning, it's always cringy when you see things like this. Try and take them and you'll find out. I see stuff like that and I think you're just playing into the stereotype, and it's so tone deaf. I would like to see a right that has more rhetorical punch, as well as the benefit of the dialectic win. And so I'm going to try and help with that. And I can't guarantee this is the right way to do this. It's one of those things you just have to try, A/B test. But what I discuss on this channel a lot is something I call turning words, which is borrowed from Eastern theology, but it doesn't matter. But what I consider it is there you have the argument, the dialectic, and you have the sloganeering, the rhetoric. Well, they meet at a certain point, like a razor blade. There's a razor's edge that's very sharp, where the entirety of the dialectic, the entirety of the logical argument, which is winning across the country, meets with effective rhetoric. So it's very fine. It's a word or a handful of words, words or phrases that dispel delusion because the argument is presented in its most complete and concise form. And it stuns the opponent. One of my favorites is that town where somebody put up the flyers that said, Islam is right about women. And you didn't see a bunch of these left-leaning or normies suddenly go, oh, I get it. Their reaction was like, I'm confused. This doesn't make sense. Why would somebody say that? It was massive cognitive dissonance because they realize they're trapped. You can't say Islam is wrong because that would go against the tolerance. But you can't say Islam is right because then, well, you're in favor of some laws that are rather regressive. So that's turning words or phrases that dispel delusion. Islam is right about women. Ouch. That's the kind of response I would like to see out of, we'll say, the right in these sorts of events. So how would this work in dealing with the current thing? Well, for one, you got to realize a tragedy has just occurred. I mean, regardless of if there was any cloak and dagger stuff behind the scenes, there's been a tragedy. So it has to be publicly acknowledged as that. Someone will come at a politician and go, this is terrible. We have to do something. And so you say, yeah, we do. But we're not going back to slavery. And that would be my response. And you would get a very similar, confused, disoriented, what is that supposed to mean? Reaction out of your ideological opponents that hear it. But what you've managed to do but we're not going back to slavery, is with a handful of words, with some potent rhetoric, because these are the people that like to put themselves on the pedestal as being, we're opposed to slavery. We're just like those white Republican, gun-toting Christian males that stood in ranks against a hail of musket fire to free the slaves in the Civil War. Talk about LARPing. Yeah, I don't think most of these people would stand through one volley without turning and running, but this is the pedestal they imagine themselves on, is they identify with the people that ended slavery. Funny, isn't that? So you take that rhetorical high ground and you make the entire argument. I mean, Machiavelli talked about this 500 years ago, the difference between arming one's subjects and disarming them. This has long been established and understood as the grounds between a citizen and a slave. But you have to be able to present that real time in a living conversation in just a handful of words, because that's all you get without just appearing tone deaf and autistic. We have to do something. There has to be a way to end these mass events. Yes, but we're not going back to slavery. Now you are the reasonable one. Now you are the compassionate one. Now you are the one that has the wisdom in the public eye, in the back and forth rhetorical jousting. Now it may flop. I'm not saying I have the answer, but this is the sort of rhetoric, this is the sort of technique that the public relations side of things needs to look at when they're dealing with this on the right. Because despite winning the argument, they're still losing the rhetorical battle. And you need to have stock phrases like this ready to repel the opponent's rhetoric. What it does is it puts them immediately on the defensive. You need to attack, not with threats, not with like F around and find out. That's just, it comes across so poorly. I mean, you're a politician, and a lot of people like to bash Biden as far as, because he mumbles and stumbles and can't talk anymore. But he's a damn good rhetorician. Like, I watched his speech after this event, And it's frightening how good he is at it. Like, even the fact he stumbles and struggles for words, I think if this guy was 10 years younger, he'd be a terrifying opponent when it comes to these rhetorical duels. There's a reason he's a lifelong politician. He is good at it. That old fool has some serious game. You have to respect your opponent when they're good at something, and you have to be able to put them on the defensive. And that's what you need to look for with this rhetoric. Yes, but we're not going back to slavery. Does that because suddenly they have to defend this idea that you're calling for a disarmed population, which would be a population of slaves, but done so in a way that sounds caring and wise and also is short and concise enough that it can be implemented on the fly in a real conversation. It also employs a technique I've covered before on this channel called agree and amplify, which you agree with your opponent but amplify what they're discussing to show the absurdity of it, reductio ad absurdum. It's pure technique, and it's a technique that the various celebrities, comedians, activists on the left use very well. So it's time to take a page from their playbook and turn it against them. Kudos to this woman, but every situation is individual. There's no systematic response to this sort of thing. It's all individual situations with individual circumstances, but it's better to have more people concealed carrying than not. So God bless this woman. Thank you for your skill and bravery. Those things are real, and they saved many lives. And conservatives, you guys need to get some game.